Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 Senate elections and as of June 8th, 2022, who I think is favored to win each and every one of these races. So we're just going to get right into it. And I think you all know the drill by now. We're just going to be predicting the Senate map, and it's great because we now have more polling data available to base our predictions off of. And so I think we'll start by looking at the most recent Senate polls on 538. So we don't have that many new polls. We do have the most recent polls from last Thursday, and it was the Washington Senate race, Patty Murray versus Tiffany Smiley, and it had Murray up by 11. This is a pretty good pollster as well, so this number is pretty reputable. It's pretty close to what I think is going to happen. In Florida, we had a poll that had DeSantis up by 6 over Val Demings. Again, this is a pretty good pollster, but DeSantis only being up 6 is a little weird. You'd think he'd be up by a little more, but it's not too outlandish. It's not too crazy of a claim. And in Nevada, we got some really interesting data where Cortez Master, the Democratic incumbent, was beating Sam Brown by 23 and Adam Laxalt by 21, which is a very bad sign for the GOP. In Ohio, J.D. Vance is only ahead of Tim Ryan by 2 points, which isn't great. In North Carolina, this is actually a GOP internal poll signal, which, it's actually pretty good, but it's still a GOP internal. Only had Ted Budd up by 2 over Sherry Beasley, although this other poll had him up by 8. So, yeah, those are the recent polling numbers we've gotten. There was also a poll I wanted to point out here that had Mark Kelly beating every Republican candidate by, a lot. And it's not a great poll. It's pretty unknown. I don't really think it's that reputable, but it's interesting that Kelly would be leading by so much against these candidates. So, anyways, we're just going to get into it now. So, I think for the safe Democratic states, for the first time, we're ostracizing Washington from that list. I think Washington is not going to be a 15 or greater % margin of victory for the Democratic Party this time around, but it doesn't mean it's that competitive either. Maryland, New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. That puts the Democrats at 43 seats, which is, I think, their lowest total ever that I've had them at safe. Although, again, Colorado, Washington, Illinois, you could all make that argument. I think I'm actually going to put Illinois here because Tammy Duckworth, I think, will do fine. But, so I think 44 each for the Democrats are safe. The GOP, they've got a few as well. You got Idaho, Utah, Idaho, Utah, Alaska, the Dakotas, Kansas, both Oklahomas. There's a special election there to replace Jim Inhofe. Arkansas, Missouri could narrow up to likely if Eric Greitens gets the nomination. He bungles his campaign because he has a lot of scandals. And, there was a poll that had Lucas Kuntz, who is the Democratic candidate for this Senate race, I think within 2% of him, but I don't really think that's too reputable, and I think he'll be fine. In Iowa, we saw a bit of an upset on the primary last night, where I'll pull it up right now. We saw Michael Franken beat Abby Finkenauer, and that was not something I was expecting. Michael Franken did run for Senate in 2020, and it was quite an interesting primary there. But he did lose to Teresa Greenfield. I believe he came in second or third. I forgot whether it was him or Kimberly Graham who came in second place, but he has ran for Senate before, and he ran this time around, and he beat Finkenauer. And Finkenauer this is not something I don't really think I expected, because he outraised her in the final stretch of the campaign, so I guess we should have seen it coming a little more. But Finkenauer was a representative for the 3rd district up here. No, I think the 1st or 2nd district. But she came from up here, and she didn't really do that well. She lost most of the counties in her home district, and she was coming in favored, and now she's not going to be on the ballot for the general election. So, it's a really disappointing night for Abby Finkenauer, but I don't really think it changes anything. Franken's not a bad candidate, but Grassley, as you can see here, did very well. In his primary, he got nearly 3/4 of the vote, and he won every county, and he actually received more votes than if you combine, he received almost the same amount of votes as if you combine Finkenauer and Franken. So, I really do think that the GOP are going to be fine in Iowa no matter what. Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, Indiana, and that rounds out the list for the GOP. They've got 45 safe seats, or seats that I think are going to vote for them by more than 15%. Democrats have got 44 of those seats. So we're going to move on to our likely D seats. So the first of which is Washington. Now, as I mentioned, there was a poll up here, if you look at it. Tiffany Smiley was down by 11 to Patty Murray. And, this isn't a great poll for Patty Murray. It shows she's winning. It doesn't really show the race to be like a toss-up or any sort of competitive. But, Washington, I think, could narrow up a little bit. And I think, as of right now, I'd expect that 11% margin of victory would be pretty close. I think Murray wins by a little more, probably 13 or 14. But, As of right now, I don't think he would win more than 15, although that could change. Colorado's up next. Similar thing with Colorado. We've seen some polling there that's quite good for the Democratic Party. When you look at the polls with Michael Bennet, he is winning in every single one of them. And even in polls of his opponent's campaign, Eli Bremer did an internal poll. He was down by 8 to Michael Bennet. And we've seen polling that's even had him against his likely opponent, Ron Hanks, by 18. And Ron Hanks is actually not that good of an opponent either, because he is known to be kind of an extreme right-winger, conspiracy theorist, and the Democrats are trying to fund him in this race. And the fact that they're going out of their way to fund him to get him to run against Michael Bennet just says to me that the GOP, I don't really think, are going to make a play for Colorado once Hanks officially gets the nomination, and I think Bennet win re-election by somewhere around 14%. So yeah, I think that's it for our likely Democratic states. For our likely Republican states, we've got a few of these. The first two are in the Rust Belt. That's Wisconsin and Ohio, and surprisingly, although these states have voted nearly 9% differently in 2020, I think they're going to vote pretty similarly this time around. Ohio's going to vote to the right of Wisconsin again, because I think the GOP is going to hold Wisconsin by about 6, and they're going to hold Ohio by 10 or 11. But it'll be a much smaller gap than it was in 2020, and both these states are going to vote red. Now, in Wisconsin, the polling there has been, all right for Republicans. It's been, usually they're underestimated in Wisconsin, so I guess it's pretty good for them. But when you look at the data there, it wouldn't suggest, this massive GOP victory. But in a Mandela Barnes internal poll, he was tied with Johnson, which, when you're tied in your own internals, is not a great sign, really. And then going back to, a year ago, Tom Nelson did a poll of him against Ron Johnson. He was up by 4%, which it's not a bad result, but it's still an internal poll. It still didn't, still wasn't amazing, but, it's from a decent pollster, so I guess it's worth looking at. But anyways, it was from a year ago. It's pretty outdated. I'm sure the number would be more favorable to Republicans now. But, yeah, so I think Wisconsin, Johnson's going to win re-election by 6%. He'll do fine in the working class areas, he'll do fine in the rural areas, and I think that people will be surprised by how well he does in the suburbs, because I think a lot of the Waukesha, the WOW areas are, they trended Democrat in 2020, but that's only because I think they hated Donald Trump. I think they're still trending blue long term, but Ron Johnson will be fine there. In Ohio, the polls have been pretty close there between Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance, and, what other candidates we've seen. In the most recent poll, Vance was up by 2, but in another poll from April, Tim Ryan was up by 2. And it's been pretty back and forth. We've seen, polls that have quite big leads, here for Tim Ryan and for Josh Mandel and J.D. Vance. But, yeah, quite frankly, I would be surprised if the Democrats do only lose this race by 2%, because while this poll is some stuff, it's not a bad pollster. It's only 500 likely voters, and polls in Ohio generally tend to be pretty wonky, especially this early on, but it's worth noting for the GOP. I think that the Democrats are going to at least try to win this race. Tim Ryan's a really good candidate. J.D. Vance isn't ideal for the Republicans, but yeah, I think the GOP are going to win this race, but I'd be interested to see where the polls are in 3 months from now, because then I can give you a better forecast. But as of right now, likely Republican, but notable. It's not in the safe column. So the next day we've actually got 2 more states, North Carolina and Florida. These are, southern states, and I think they're both going to vote for the Republicans, but by different amounts. Florida, I think Rubio's going to win by 8 to 10, whereas North Carolina, it'll be about a 5-point victory for Ted Budd. So in North Carolina, every poll essentially had Ted Budd narrowly beating Sherry Beasley. If you go to North Carolina, the most recent poll had Ted Budd. Oh, actually, have this thing. This is pretty nice. This is giving me some 2020 flashbacks, but yeah, so the most recent poll we had Ted Budd beating Sherry Beasley by 2%, and that's pretty interesting, because it's a GOP internal, and only being up by 2 in your own internals isn't really a good sign. Generally, you want to be winning by at least 4 or 5 in an internal poll for it to be considered good for you, but it's still only one poll. And the poll that happened essentially just a day before it had him up by 8, so that's not really a cause for concern. But what is a cause for concern is that we had a stretch of 2 polls in early to mid-May that had Beasley up by 5, and from Emerson, which is a pretty good source, it's pretty neutral, pretty good pollster, and they had Beasley up by 5, and Meeting Street Insights, which is a GOP poll, and he was only up by 1 in his own internal and down by 5 in a nonpartisan poll, so that's not a great sign for him. And it wasn't. I'm sure he didn't take it very well, but at the same time, he's up by 5 in these in the aggregate by 538. I think that he will be perfectly fine, in all honesty here. I'm saying he'll win by 5. I think he's up by 5 in the polls, so I think that 538, and I kind of agree on this race. Shari Beasley's not a bad candidate by any means, but North Carolina is a red state. It's not going to trend blue in a midterm that's going to go against the Democratic Party. In Florida, the polls here are really, really weird. I don't really know what to make of them, to be honest. I'm kind of just ignoring them, because the polling data we have suggests this race could be competitive, but I don't really believe that. Let's go to Florida. So, the most recent poll we had Rubio up by 6. Before that, we saw polls that had Demings up by 2, and then before that, we had a poll that had her down by 18, and then, she was down by 12 and down by 7, and then, going back to last year, Rubio was winning in every poll. But, I really do think that the Democrats in Florida are kind of scrambling right now, because they did something interesting. They bought a lot of public radio stations that are targeted towards Hispanics, which I think will help their messaging problem a bit. But it's not gonna be enough to swing the entire state of Florida. It's a good step for the party, but it's not gonna be enough to unseat Rubio, who's a good incumbent. And Val Evans isn't a bad challenger, but at the same time, I really think that things would be easier for the Democrats if they're running against Rick Scott and not Marco Rubio, and they're running in a blue or at least neutral year rather than a year that's tilted so heavily towards the GOP. So Rubio, I think, will be fine. Now, for our lean Democratic states, this is where it gets quite interesting. We've only got one of those, so that's New Hampshire, and the polling in New Hampshire has been, again, quite good for the Democratic Party. When you take a look at what the numbers are saying, you will see that in the most recent polling, we saw Mackie Hassan beating Fenton by 6%, but the GOP likely to run Bolduc, and he was down by 1 to Hassan. Another poll was down by 15. He was down by 6. So, it's to me, I think Bolduc's not that good of a candidate. Chuck Morris is probably their best candidate, but again, he's not likely to win the primary. If he wins, I'll probably move it down to tilt, or at least it'll be a bit less strong of a lean Democratic race, because right now it's a pretty strong lean D. It's closer to likely than toss-up, but yeah. I think Hassan's going to win by 4 or 5%. It'll be kind of like the inverse North Carolina, but a little closer, if that makes sense. So New Hampshire is a state that will swing a lot. It's essentially one large suburb, and that gives it the ability to fluctuate, but at the same time, when you take a look at this race, when you see the polling, when you see how the Republicans have been doing here, this race has been kind of, without Sununu or Kelly Ayotte running, it's been pretty bad for the GOP. So Mackie Hassan, as a good incumbent, I think she's going to win. Next up, we have our leading Republican states. There's only one of those for now. It's Pennsylvania, and so I don't know why. I feel like John Fetterman's gotten a lot of hype, and he's not a bad candidate. I personally think Connor Lamb would have been a better fit for Pennsylvania, but obviously Fetterman won the primary. But the issue that the GOP or that the Democrats have here is that I'm not wishing Fetterman any harm, but he does have health issues. He might be knocked off the campaign trail till July, which would be bad because they'd be essentially losing a month of campaigning to the Republicans. And while it's not a deal breaker, but it's still not great for them. And Fetterman. So I think people really think Fetterman has the ability to communicate with rural and working class voters, many Democrats haven't been able to do as of late, which is certainly interesting. If he can do that, it's good for them. But I think a lot of that is kind of a stretch, to be honest. And on the other hand, I think he's not that great of a candidate for the Philly suburbs, which are really where the future of the Pennsylvania Democrats are. It's not trying to get back voters they lost 20 years ago. It's trying to appeal to the suburbs of Philadelphia and trying to continue to get the Biden numbers in Chester, Montgomery, and Bucks County, as well as trying to expand into Berks and Lancaster and York, etc. And so I think Fetterman doesn't really do that as well as Connor Lamb would have, and I think that's what caused him to lose. So, again, Dr. Oz isn't a great candidate. I don't really think that, McCormick and Oz are both flawed. Kathy Barnett would have been a disaster for the GOP. She might have actually lost to Fetterman. But, the Republicans did not really have anything good in this race. And, Dr. Oz, to me, just is okay. I think he's good enough to win, assuming the national partisanship carries him, but at the same time, he's inexperienced and has the ability to lose this race. So I could see a scenario in October where the GOP are just kind of like, oh no, Dr. Ross is blowing it, he's fumbling the bag, we're going to go to Pennsylvania, we're going to go bail him out here and win this race anyways. But, again, Fetterman and Oz aren't really great candidates either, but I think Fetterman's a little better, but, again, it's still not enough. He's still not good enough to win in an R+3, R+4 type environment, and that to me suggests that Pennsylvania will go to the GOP, but 2 or 3%. So now we're into the toss-ups, and there are 3 toss-ups, and for the Democrats to maintain control of the Senate, they have to win all 3. And so where do I stand on that? We're about to find out. So first, I think the Democrats are going to win Nevada, and I could honestly see myself moving this to a lean category, but I think for now I'll just stay on tilt. The polling has been atrocious for Republicans, and I don't really know why. Laxalt had a 1-point lead over Cortez Masto in this one poll, but this is a GOP super PAC, and McLaughlin has been really wrong in the past. I don't really love them. Suffolk is better. Like, this poll to me is more concerning for Cortez Masto, but again, this was like, I think, conducted right before the Roe leak, and yeah, it was a month before the Roe leak, which obviously helped Democrats in the state as libertarian as Nevada, and I just, these polls that have lacked so that were all kind of outdated and they're all flawed. Like, this poll was atrocious. I remember seeing it. I was like, what are you guys doing? So this is like the only poll that I think is concerning for Cortez Masto, whereas all the other ones can kind of be ruled out, and it's outweighed anyways because she was up by 23 against Sam Brown and 21 against Adam Laxalt. And the reason that Sam Brown's still in this race is because he was actually endorsed by the Nevada GOP, and I don't know why, because he's down. Like, Laxalt probably won the primary because Laxalt has the Trump endorsement, he has more name recognition, etc. He ran for statewide office in 2018. But yeah, like, I'm just gonna assume for now that Laxalt's gonna get the nomination, and he's down by 21 in this poll. And the excitement really hasn't been there for him. He's not that great of a candidate. He's not, like, bad, but he's just kind of meh. And I think that to win a state like Nevada as a Republican, you have to do a little better. You have to be a better candidate. Like, when you look at Nevada as a whole, you might think that since 2022 is going to be a better year for the GOP than 2020 or 2018, you might think that, oh, well, it was pretty close in 2020 and 2018, so I think naturally, if you shift it a little bit due to national partisanship, it'll flip blue or flip red. But I don't really think that's going to happen. Nevada has been pretty stagnant, doesn't really move. It's kind of like Florida. It's pretty much immune to waves. It can get quite stable for the Democrats, and that's why they haven't lost a Senate race here since 2012. It's why they haven't, really had any atrocious elections in Nevada dating back to 2014. So I think that Cortez Masto is a good incumbent. People, I think, underrate her ability to appeal to Hispanics. She'll probably do better than mine with Hispanics because, again, this midterm is likely to see a drop in low propensity Hispanics, because the thing is, the drops in turnout that we see in midterms relative to presidential elections are generally in voters of color and rural voters, and in the type of voters of color that are going to drop in turnout are the ones that trended towards the Republicans in 2020. So the Hispanics that don't have college degrees that voted for Trump in bigger numbers than we've seen in the past in 2020 won't turn out as hard as they did in 2020, the way in 2022. And so I think that, to me, is enough to make me think Cortez Masto is going to win this race. Laxalt doesn't really have a ton of appeal to Hispanics either way. His coalition is more going to be suburbanites, and that is not a bad coalition to have in Nevada, but it's also going to be offset by Cortez Masto's gain in the city of Las Vegas and the fact that rural turnout will be down, and Nevada is still a blue leading state no matter how red the national environment is. So I think for now Cortez Masto's favored, but it's still essentially a toss-up. So next up we've got Arizona and Georgia. I think I'll do Arizona first, and Arizona's going to give the GOP the lead here. So I'm moving Arizona down from lean Republican to tilt Republican, and I'm doing that because I think that, Blake Masters isn't that great of a candidate, as we've seen in the polls and as we've seen by his recent scandal. But, it's just literally every poll we've seen has had Mark Kelly winning, like, no matter who you put on the ballot against him. And to me, I'm just kind of like, well, if he has such a convincing lead in every single poll we're doing, that would generally lead me to think he's favored, especially because in recent polls he was up by 16 over Blake Masters. But I'm just gonna go on a limb and say the GOP winning. I know seeing every single one of these polls having come up is convincing. I know it looks bad for the GOP, but at the same time, Arizona's pretty fluctuant. We see races in which the GOP win by 20, but the Democrats win on the same ballot, like in 2018. Doug Ducey won re-election by 16%, and Christensen won the Senate race by 2%. So there's a lot of ticket splitting. There's a lot of people changing their votes between election cycles, and Trump was, I think, uniquely bad for Arizona. He did all right with Hispanics in the South, but in Maricopa County and Phoenix, he ran a really subpar campaign. I think that's, Biden only won the state by 10,000 votes, so Arizona's really close. It's functionally just a 50-50 state, and I think with 2022 being a redder year than 2020 by 6, 7, 8%, that I think it's enough to flip Arizona. And I think that even if Blake Masters is a bad candidate, which he is, Mark Kelly is just not in a good position right now. I just really think that because of how much the Phoenix suburbs are going to swing, that's just really going to hurt Mark Kelly. So I know that Democrats have a good chance here, but I think this is a blown opportunity. They're ahead in every poll. Blake Masters is a bad candidate, but I still think they're going to lose it at the end of the day just because of the national partisanship. Because I don't say that a lot, saying, oh, national partisanship isn't really a good argument all the time, but in Arizona it kind of is because of how susceptible the state is to swings. So I think Arizona narrowly going to vote for the GOP. So yeah, Georgia's our last state, and I really, really don't know who's going to win this race. Like, it's genuinely a toss-up. I would not want to bet on this race. I wouldn't want to do anything, but I know you guys hate when I leave it as a toss-up. So what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to give it to the GOP. Now, on one hand, I think that this isn't even tilt. This is like literally a toss. I'm just flipping a coin. Like, you could flip a coin and you'd have essentially the same chance getting it right as I do, but that's just how close it is right now. But anyways, so I think, yeah. The Democrats have some good signs here. So first of all, Herschel Walker's not a good candidate. He says things that I think are kind of just really out there and really don't help him as a candidate. And I think on top of that, when you look at who the base he's trying to appeal to, I think that he's losing in the suburbs. He's not going to do great with the rural areas. They're going to see a decrease in turnout like we saw in the 2021 runoffs. And we're also going to see a lot of I think rural black voters coming back for the Democrats. You know, again, they were still pretty good for Democrats in 2020, but I think some of them are going to come back, even if the turnout's down a little bit. But that's that I think will help Warnock a bit. And also, I've heard rumors that Walker is down by 4 in GOP internal polling, and that the GOP might just kind of pull out of the state and just focus on Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, instead of trying to flip a seat that will probably just flip back to the Democrats in 2028 either way. And so I think that is bad news for Herschel Walker. I really could see Raphael Warnock winning, but on the other hand, it's a red midterm. The state will fluctuate a little bit, not as much as Arizona, not as much as Wisconsin or Ohio, not as much as even Florida or North Carolina. But I think that Georgia is going to fluctuate a bit, and that to me is enough to give the GOP the narrowest of advantages. Brian Kemp being on the ballot is also going to help Herschel Walker. You know, right now, Kemp is probably winning that race by 4 or 5%, and Abrams will be good for black turnout, which will help Warnock, but Kemp's going to boost him to boost Walker to some extent in the Atlanta suburbs, which Walker's going to run behind Kemp in the suburbs, but I think he'll be boosted a little bit by having Kemp on the ballot instead of David Perdue. So yeah, it's really close though. I really don't want to be like, if someone gets into my comments is like, oh, you're so wrong on Georgia, I'm like, yeah, I flipped a quarter and that's essentially what I'm doing here. But yeah, Georgia is essentially a coin flip, but as of right now, this is my prediction. I'll do this again in 3 or 4 weeks, but yeah, June 8th, 2022, I have the Democrats at 48 seats, Republicans at 52, GOP majority in the Senate as of right now. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, hope you found it informative. If you did, leave a like, comment down your thoughts. If you disagree with me on any of these races, I'm happy to engage if you're, not completely abhorrent and obnoxious about it. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.